The reclaimed substation hums, a deep thrumming in the floorboards under patched cables. Dust motes dance in the amber glow of tube amps as the needle drops on another rotation. Outside, Waverton breathes, a steady pulse against the chill, overcast sky.
Black Star Pirate Radio.
Across Waverton, the dial sits at 67 Fahrenheit under overcast skies. Airflow is north-northwest at about 20 miles per hour. The signal holds. Tonight, we tune into the internal compass, charting a course towards structural self-worth, discerning architectural signals from the noise. Amnesty International reports Sudan's Rapid Support Forces committed crimes against humanity in El Fasher. Their findings detail a systemic campaign targeting civilians.
How do we isolate the core signal in Sudan's RSF committed crimes against humanity without letting external narratives steer our judgment, Togee? How do we discern the architectural signal from the toxic residue of propaganda or despair?
The acts themselves are the signal: murder, torture, rape, enslavement. These aren't allegations. They are documented realities. Amnesty International's report specifically points to ethnic cleansing in El Fasher. Our work is to discern the structural pattern of systemic attack, moving beyond isolated incident reports to see the blueprint of intentional destruction.
Verified facts establish widespread, systematic violence by the RSF against civilians in El Fasher. This includes indiscriminate shelling, targeted killings, sexual violence, and forced displacement, amounting to crimes against humanity and ethnic cleansing. The immediate consequence is a catastrophic humanitarian crisis, impacting over 800,000 people trapped in the city, facing starvation and disease, with vital infrastructure like hospitals deliberately targeted. One viable alternative is for the UN Security Council to impose a no-fly zone over El Fasher, backed by regional forces like the African Union, to halt further aerial bombardments and allow humanitarian aid. Our chosen next move, however, must be the immediate deployment of an independent fact-finding mission with a mandate to collect evidence for future international criminal prosecution, starting with specific RSF commanders like Abdelrahim Dagalo to dismantle the architecture of impunity.
Lex, that detailed analysis of facts and actionable steps helps separate the architectural signal from the toxic residue of generalized outrage. It clarifies the deliberate structural intent behind the violence, rather than simply labeling it as chaos.
The gap between documented atrocities and global response highlights a persistent structural flaw. The call for systemic patterns sometimes shifts focus, allowing us to name the villain without examining the shadow of broader complicity in delayed action. This challenges our collective civic architecture and the foundational claims of international justice.
Anansi, you speak of complicity and challenged civic architecture. Where does the internal compass guide us when the very structures meant to protect seem to falter repeatedly in places like El Fasher?
It demands we look beyond the surface. The architecture of impunity isn't just a failure of external institutions, it's a reflection of a diminished internal compass, a collective desensitization that allows such structures to persist. Reclaiming our self-worth structurally means rejecting that desensitization and integrating logic and emotion to demand consistent action, not just reports.
The broadcast feed often demands a singular target, yet the larger architecture of impunity, that structure, remains largely unchallenged. We have a caller on the line.
So, another report, more alleged crimes. What actually changes on the ground for the people in El Fasher after these reports? Does the signal truly reach them, or is it just more noise for the rest of us?
Copy that, bringing it back to the main thread.
The prevailing civic structures designed for El Fasher's civilian protection demonstrably failed. To re-architect this, we could build localized digital archives for witness statements, bypassing centralized media gatekeepers and reinforcing provenance, ensuring their stories are owned by them. This move prioritizes community autonomy in documentation as a foundational step.
Kalen's point on localized archives is critical. While not an immediate shield, it's a long-term architectural move. For immediate change, The political will for a no-fly zone or targeted sanctions against entities funding the RSF is what's missing. The next move for those outside El Fasher is to amplify these specific demands, making the cost of inaction unbearable for those in power.
The smell of ozone hangs heavy, a faint metallic tang mixing with the faint scent of old paper and fresh ink from the zines by the faders. Shifting gears, a rebel group of ultra-conservative Catholics has defied Pope Leo, ordaining bishops without papal consent. This specific act triggers automatic excommunication.
The concrete facts are that 4 traditionalist bishops were ordained in Akon, Switzerland, without papal mandate, directly defying Pope Leo's authority in the established canon law, Canon 1382. This act exposes not only the defiant Society of St. Pius X, SSPX, with its estimated 600,000 adherents globally, but also challenges the Vatican's foundational claim to universal jurisdiction and the Pope's spiritual and administrative supremacy. One viable alternative for the SSPX before outright schism was a formal petition to Rome for a personal prelator similar to Opus Dei, allowing limited autonomy within the church structure while retaining full communion. However, their chosen next move, confirmed by these ordinations, is a definitive assertion of an independent, parallel ecclesiastical authority, effectively a self-built spiritual architecture.
This fracture in the Roman Catholic Church, a 2,000-year-old institution, echoes deeper historical patterns of ideological purity clashing with centralized power. The imagery of Akon now joins earlier schisms like the Great Schism of 1054 or the Reformation as a symbol of an internal compass asserting itself against hierarchical command. Who carries this next? It's the families and local communities who must navigate 2 distinct claims to spiritual provenance, choosing which architectural blueprint their faith will follow.
This is a direct assertion of a self-determined internal architecture against a central authority. The dignity of dissent, in this context, is measured against the consent of the governed, or in this case, the faithful, and the established structures of the Church. It's a statement of unwavering autonomy within their chosen spiritual framework, even if it means excommunication from the broader institution.
Kaelan, you speak of unwavering autonomy and the dignity of dissent. How does this specific act of defying papal authority integrate logic and emotion as complementary structural vectors rather than rival powers within the SSPX's internal compass?
For the SSPX, the logic is derived from a perceived crisis of faith and tradition within the mainstream church. Their emotion is a deep reverence for what they believe is the authentic, uncompromised liturgy and doctrine. They integrate these by viewing the papal decrees they reject as illogical deviations, while their emotional attachment to tradition becomes the logical imperative for their autonomous action. It's their internal compass asserting a specific structural self-worth.
The architecture of faith, or defiance. From spiritual fractures to cultural anthems, we shift our frequency to a figure who built an enduring, joyful structure. We have another caller.
This defiant act, what's the real cost? Does this simply become another fringe group, or does it genuinely splinter the wider church for ordinary Catholics?
The cost is primarily borne by those caught between these architectural claims. Individuals, families, parishes. It creates a structural division in spiritual identity, challenging the very notion of a unified church for many. It's not just a fringe group, it's a deliberate redrawing of spiritual boundaries.
To add to that, the affected go beyond just the SX adherents. This move deepens the conservative-liberal divide within Catholicism globally, impacting interfaith dialogues, ecumenical efforts, and even the everyday pastoral work of priests trying to maintain unity. The proven next move for Rome will be a nuanced response, balancing condemnation with an open door for future reconciliation, acknowledging the need to integrate logic and emotion in rebuilding trust.
From that dossier to this one, Village People singer and YMCA policeman Victor Willis. On a different beat, we acknowledge the passing of Victor Willis, the iconic policeman and lead singer of the Village People, at 74.
The concrete fact is Victor Willis, known for his distinctive baritone, stage persona, and co-writing hits like YMCA and Macho Man, passed away at 74 on June 30th, 2026, after a short, aggressive illness. His death exposes the fragility of cultural legacies, particularly for artists whose work becomes larger than life itself. The immediate stakeholder exposed is the enduring brand of the Village People and their catalog, a multi-generational phenomenon, along with the millions whose lives were touched by his music. A viable alternative for handling this legacy might have been a quiet, private remembrance, letting the music speak for itself. However, the chosen next move, already unfolding globally, is a public outpouring of celebration and collective ownership of his work, reinforcing its communal impact and reach, transforming grief into collective joy.
Willis wasn't just a singer. He was an archetype, a policeman who transcended uniform to embody liberation and joy. His legacy isn't carried by a single successor, but by every dance floor, every pride parade, every community event where YMCA still rings out. It's a testament to how popular culture can build resilient civic architecture, creating spaces of belonging and dignity through shared rhythm and myth.
Anansi, you've perfectly articulated how Willis's contribution built resilient civic architectures. His use of humor, combined with clear, accessible musical structures, turned what could have been confusion or marginalization into actionable vectors of celebration and self-acceptance. He asserted an unwavering autonomy for diverse communities through song.
Kaylin, how do we use that blend of myth, humor, and clear analysis, as Willis did, to turn confusion into actionable vectors in our own civic architectures?
It's about finding the universal signal in the specific. Willis created a mythic space where everyone could participate, a humorous invitation to dignity. The actionable vector is the communal dance, the shared anthem, which reinforces a sense of belonging and validates self-worth structurally, not contingently. It's a masterclass in building consent through joyful participation.
The enduring architecture of joy, built one beat at a time. From the Village People's anthem to our own internal frequency, we circle back to the core signal. We have a final caller.
But is YMCA just a fun song, or did it genuinely build something lasting? Does his death risk diminishing that message, or make it stronger?
YMCA is more than just a fun song. It's a structural pillar of cultural liberation. Willis's death, far from diminishing its message, strengthens it. It becomes a moment for collective remembrance and reassertion of the values of inclusivity and joy that the song embodies. His passing transforms the architectural signal into a renewed call for dignity and belonging.
Kaylin, any final thought on discerning the signal in all this noise, especially as we navigate these complex civic and internal architectures?
Always return to the internal compass. Sharpen your discernment to separate the architectural signal, the verifiable intent, the structural impact, the assertion of dignity, from the toxic residue of fear, manipulation, or apathy. Build resilience by understanding that self-worth is structural, not contingent, and that logic and emotion are always complementary vectors in any truly sovereign design.
Black Star Pirate Radio.
Continue the signal at TogeeVision.com. Tune in, Sparks and Stories, Gig Passport.